Should be starting now. Great. All right. Welcome everyone to our next Research Technology and Development Topical Interest Group webinar from AEA. Happy to have everyone joining today. My name is Josh Schnell. I am one of the TIG co-chairs along with Robin Wagner, Gavin Reddick, who's here, and Dee Cross. And we're very happy to have you. As you know, we've had webinars over the years, and one of the things we're trying to do is get those into a more steady, stable of oncoming presentations so that we can, I'll be completely honest with you, we're trying to just promote activity within the TIG and build up the community, share more, learn more, and essentially try to bring the group back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of engagement. So one of the things that we wanted to do as we're collecting other presenters to be part of the webinar is to kick things off in November and make this a regular event. One of the things I'll start with, though, for those of you who were unable to attend, AEA is just a recap. We had a great eval 2023 in Indianapolis, with TIG fielding a number of different presentations and submissions. We had 3 great posters, 2 panel sessions, a multi-paper, and then 1 Ignite, 1 Birds of a Feather, and 1 Think Tank, alongside several opportunities to connect and socialize. We had a TIG business meeting of sorts, an in-person meeting that we were able to bring in a few AEA members who weren't familiar with the TIG and talk with them. We had the TIG fair. As you'll see on the slide here, we also had a TIG dinner. A number of us went out. Gavin organized a room at the local German restaurant there in Indianapolis, and we had a nice time catching up and socializing. We also had a joint dinner one of the evenings with the Translational Research TIG. Robin worked with the chair of the Translational Research TIG to set that up. So it was really nice. I think it was a very good event for those of us who attended to reconnect and update on what's been happening. But it was also an opportunity for me, having been part of the TIG for a number of years now, to notice that, you know, some of our usual participants were not there. And so I think I left the evaluation conference really motivated to try and rebuild and reconnect and update some of the things that we're doing. So that's partly what I want to talk about now. So on the slide, you'll see the second bullet there, AEA RTD TIG survey. You may have received, or you will be receiving, an email that includes a link to a short survey. It's really an opportunity for the TIG leadership to understand more about what it is AEA can offer, the RTD TIG can offer to engage you, where you may have been attending other events. And we're just trying to get a sense of where you all are going to connect with folks on topics of research, R&D evaluation, and translational evaluation. So please do fill that out if you haven't already. It's important for us to get that information and to start to think about what programming we can do, what changes we can make to make this a more active and engaged community, and to make sure that you're getting what you need out of it in terms of learning about new techniques, new data, new theories, and also an opportunity for you all to share what you're doing and to share your experiences and techniques. So please do respond to that, or reach out to myself or Robin, Gavin, or Dee Dee if you have any questions or input you'd like to share. We're happy to have a call and dive in deeper in terms of your needs from the TIG. Another thing, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, want to make sure that, oh, thanks, Gavin's put the link in the chat. I want to essentially put out a call as well for the TIG webinar series. There's a number of recordings that are available, but we're interested in essentially fielding one webinar a month at a minimum. I think we're close to lining up our December webinar, but we're looking for early next year to start to schedule those in. So please do reach out if you have a project that you have recently completed that you'd like to share, or even if you have a challenge that you've been dealing with that you'd like to get some input on. I think we should think about these not just as one-way webinars, but as opportunities to engage the community. And I will say that feel free to raise your hand or put a question or a comment in the chat. This is not going to be a traditional webinar today. It's really just kind of a conversation and an attempt to reestablish some of that webinar activity. All right. So one of the things I want to remind everyone is that we have a LinkedIn group that you can join. We can put that information in the chat as well. That is one of the places that in the past we've used to inform the community about upcoming AEA activities, but it's also an opportunity for group members to share interesting events that they're aware of and attending, or papers that they may have released, or any other kind of information that the community could benefit from, raise questions. Again, we're just trying to make sure that we have an active community. We have so many people with so much experience in doing evaluation. We want to make sure everyone's getting that opportunity to connect and learn and share. We've struggled with our email lists, and being able to essentially connect with you all, inform you all, keep you informed of what's happening. And so one of the other things that Gavin in particular has been working with Dee Dee to do is to create a new RTD webinars listserv. And that is coming out to you via emails that we have available to us via AEA and other sources. So if you've engaged with us in the past, we'll reach out to you, and if we have current information, then we'll give you that opportunity to join. That should give us more functionality in terms of being able to connect with everyone. And then, of course, existing AEA members have the AEA community. We have our own page there for the Research Technology and Development TIG. We're working on updating that, and in some of the notifications I mentioned, we're looking for a communications liaison. So if you're interested in that, we're looking for someone who can help us keep the website updated, to share information out when we have it from either AEA or from members. So get in touch with me if you're interested in that. All right. So 2024 programming. what I mean by that is these upcoming monthly webinars and the Eval 2024 annual conference. I want you all to, if you can put it in the chat, if you'd like to now, or reach out to us, but we want to learn from you what you want to share with the community, what you want to learn from the community. That can be by suggesting possible webinar topics, or suggesting your own webinar presentations, as well as themes that we can fold into our call for proposals and submissions to the annual conference in 2024. That, it's hard to believe, but that process is starting soon, and we'll be releasing the call early next year. And so now is a good time to start thinking about what we want to present there. So some of the examples that I put on the slide here, just we're always interested in new evaluation methods and data. We had an interesting session presented by Anand Desai this year about simulation and the use of simulation in logic modeling. It was a very interesting discussion, and one that I think could continue as a theme that we talk about either in the webinar series or at the annual conference. I know there's new policy data sources available now with Overton. So those are just some examples that may be of interest. Also, the topic that I had aimed to talk about today was looking at these new R&D models, the ARPA model of funding, very milestone driven, very specific program manager led funding models, or for example, convergence research, that multidisciplinary, wicked problem focused research, what's happening with nonprofits, foundations. These are all things that I think are still relevant and interesting, that we can talk about possible themes or putting together sessions. So the other thing that I'm interested in, maybe you are as well, is it's been some years now since the Evidence Act came out. And I know in the early days after that, we had a number of sessions at AEA talking about the Evidence Act and what kind of impact it was going to have. I think it might be useful to have someone from one of the agencies talk about, or maybe we can get a panel together of multiple groups from different agencies to talk about what they're seeing now a number of years out, and what's been implemented, what remains to be implemented, what are some of the lessons learned. So definitely we were very interested in accelerating and improving the content that we're sharing and the programming that we're doing. So, but as a volunteer organization, obviously, we rely on all of you to present for us and to connect us to groups that could present. So please think about what might be relevant, what might be timely, and what you think the community would want to hear about. Please do consider submitting. Some of us are very open to having a session to discuss possible multi-paper panels or sessions at Eval 2024. So on that topic, Eval 2024 is taking place the 21st to 26th of October, 21st and 22nd being the usual pre-conference professional development sessions. And that's going to be in Portland, Oregon. And we really have I've set a goal for us to increase our submissions to pre-pandemic levels. So we want to have, around 40 or more great sessions that we, that continue to have the great quality that you all submit, and that, are really relevant, not just to the TIG specifically, but also to other parts. I think the translational research TIG, we had a nice opportunity to cross pollinate with them, and there's a lot of potential there. One of the things we want to do this year as well, for some of you who in the past have attended a conference where we had what we call the pre-conference, we'd like to do that again this year. And so we're working on that. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's really an opportunity for us before the main sessions of AEA begins to have a very concentrated, focused few hours, half a day, 3 to 4 hours. We include 2 to 3 panel sessions, and it's just a chance to get the group together and really focus in on a number of topics and have that opportunity for a lot of discussion and learning. When the AEA meeting kicks off, there's so many different sessions that everybody's interested in. It could be a challenge to keep everybody together. So the pre-conference allows us to do that. But as you can imagine, the pre-conference also takes time and effort to plan. Typically, we need some kind of a host. We've had faculty members at local institutions in the past who've been able to find us space. We've had sponsors who've helped to cover the costs of coffee breaks or meals. And then, of course, we need volunteers to help us organize, to put together sessions and to get the word out. So again, this is all the activity of the TIG and the benefits that we get from being part of the TIG and part of AEA. Really, it depends a lot on what everyone can bring to the table. So we're looking for volunteers and help. Please do reach out if you're interested in helping with that. As I mentioned, proposals for the annual conference will be coming soon, early next year, early next spring. So keep an eye out and start thinking about what projects and findings you might want to share. If you're interested, I think a number of us would like to have an open Zoom session for planning, maybe topics for webinars, maybe topics for the annual conference. In general, what we're trying to do is to continue our TIG philosophy of showcasing as many submissions as possible. So if you submit something to AEA Eval 2024 and it's not selected, we still want to give you the opportunity to present either as that pre-conference, as a session in the pre-conference, or perhaps during the webinar, or maybe a special presentation, depending on what we can do. So let's, as a community, really try to build up the activity and the content so that we're all benefiting from that renewed sharing and learning. Okay, let me just pause there and see if anybody has any questions or comments. All right. With a little bit of time left, I wanted to talk about convergence research. And this is a topic that I know a number of you have been made aware of, but it's essentially, for the NSF at least, an area of important activity. Evaluation is, I think, on the minds of the NSF and our community in terms of how we're going to evaluate convergence research, because it presents some interesting challenges. But essentially, convergence research is a way to describe research that is focused on vexing problems, wicked problems, those especially complex challenges that are outside of any given discipline, or and in particular may be focused on societal needs, so large needs, climate, other kinds of societal challenges. They tend to be driven by a specific and compelling problem, and they show deep integration across disciplines. So these are areas that require or take time to develop. They require those disciplinary connections, and they tend to be focused more on a specific problem as opposed to sort of the generation of new knowledge. I was involved in a project working with Westat when I was still at Clarivate, and my colleagues Anand Desai, and looking at definitions of convergence research and other aspects of convergence research that are important to framing how we think about it. And in fact, we had a paper accepted recently. I'm not going to talk about it here today, but can share that around through our channels. But I think this is a really important area for us as an RTD community to think about how we can establish evaluation frameworks, think about indicators for those frameworks that can help us get at convergence research and the impact of convergence research. And of course, we are confronted with some of the challenges associated with long-term technology development when we're evaluating convergence research, because we have these time horizons that are decades. So one of the things I wanted to just mention today is an interesting paper I was reviewing recently, looking at the one framework or conceptualization of convergence research that's presented in the paper titled "The Emergence of Convergence" from Sundstrom and colleagues. This was a paper that came out of a group that had participated in an NSF series of NSF workshops called Navigating the New Arctic, or NNA. These workshops were aimed at understanding resilience, climate, bio, social systems resilience and change in the Arctic. And the workshops used a complex systems framework to think about the different systems that are at play in this resilience of the Arctic. And the convergence workshop model brought in data and knowledge from multiple disciplines necessary to tackle these complex challenges and discussions. And of course included, or not of course, but to their credit, included indigenous people and other stakeholders in the Arctic that could feed into the discussion and the conversation. What I thought was worth sharing about the paper, I mean, it's a great paper, the link's there, you can access it, it's open access, was the framework that they used to think about convergence research as a cycle, if you will, that takes time, but also sees the research agenda moving, as you can see in this sort of cyclone diagram on the slide, moving through stages of sort of transcendent themes that affect the disciplines and society and the stakeholders at a much higher level, followed by periods of focused attention, trying to solve specific theoretical or practical challenges within the overall area of the convergence research. And it was an interesting conceptual model for me to think about how would we begin to tune our evaluation tools to consider those natural phases of the development of this convergence research. So if I go one step deeper, this is actually my last slide, so we can spend some time here. But within the paper, they use the case study of resilience science as a convergent process, and so I've reproduced one of their images here using that same model of the process moving kind of in cycles from transcendent to focus. But in this case, they've used resilience science to put milestones along that path in both the focused area as well as the transcendent area to track the development of that disciplinary convergence research area. So with some of the initial challenges around in ecological adaptation, then moving from a more focused set of topics to a more transcendent theme of ecological resilience, then moving back to applying that concept in focus studies. When is resilience exceeded? How do we manage tests of resilience? That led to sort of looping out into that more transcendent themes of adaptive cycles, and then that coming back in and being part of the focused research agenda, and so on and so forth. So you have this sort of cyclical nature moving through those two levels of convergence, and within this case, resilience science. Here on the right of the slide, you see the papers that have been referenced, which I think is really interesting to see the timescales we're talking about with some of those early focused studies being in the 60s, mid 60s, followed by some, over the next decades, that cycle of going from more transcendent questions about the science to those specific focused areas. It's interesting to note that a number of the authors that have been involved along the way are involved throughout. So they're repeating, there's others that are coming in. So there's a notion of how certain researchers sort of follow that path and go from the focus to the transcendent and sort of follow the cyclone, if you will, throughout, carrying that knowledge and experience up and down through the levels, and allowing that kind of focused back to transcendent. So I thought it was a really interesting conceptual model, and the authors do include some considerations for evaluation. They don't refer to it as evaluation, but they talk about metrics of success. How can we know that this process is developing and working? Well, I think an important point they make to share, which is that our typical indicators of research success, publications, citations, grants, those are not going to be particularly relevant in the short term for these convergent processes, but that over time, as a convergent research topic area matures, and you have the transition of some of these transcendent topics into specific areas, then you should start to see those indicators over time. I think another consideration we should keep in mind thinking about convergence research is how can findings or the findings from convergent research really should be broadly applied across disciplines and research systems. So in this, we need to think about where we establish our baselines and comparisons, and how we can look to see whether outputs from a convergent research process are being picked up in disciplines that are peripheral to maybe the core participants in some of those research activities. Oh, Gretchen, did you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, maybe a bit of both. I'm just slightly familiar with convergence research, and I thought the idea was that it was multiple disciplines converging, as well as potentially the translational aspects, that the science is converging towards solutions toward these bigger societal problems. And so so I'm getting confused because, of course, this is actually showing a funnel that's getting broader and then talking about multiple solutions in multiple relevant contexts, instead of what I thought was convergence, which is the deep integration across the disciplines, which ought to come out with something that's it's the synthesis that comes from all those different perspectives, including having the indigenous people involved, that comes up with something that's actually a radical innovation and new. And so this is confusing. The funnel's going the wrong direction, and I really thought they were coming up with something new rather than something. And I don't get the idea of why something that's convergent should necessarily apply to all, then feed back to all the different disciplines. So maybe you can enlighten me.
No, I'm not sure I can. I think you're raising a really good point, and one that didn't necessarily strike me initially, but as you're describing it, I think it makes you're making a very good point. I think in my read of what they've done here, we need to think about this kind of over the long term. And I think at any point along their sort of broadening cyclone, if you will, particularly in that focused area, you have that deep integration to bring the knowledge, the tools, the data from those experts over to tackle the problems, those compelling problems. And then what's the way I read it, what's needed then is for that to sort of sweep out back into the more transcendent phase, where it's almost like taking stock of what we've learned and rethinking more kind of outside those specific disciplines, beyond that specific problem set, and what have we learned, and can we think about systems more generally. So not a great response. I think you're raising a really good point, and one that as I do more to learn about this area and look at this research that they've published, I can come back to you on.
Mm-hmm. I've been working with a group called the High Bar Research Association and Alliance, excuse me, and it's highly integrative, basic, and responsive research.
Right.
And so, needless to say, I end up as the chair of the metrics collaborative action group, and so I've been looking a bit at how integration of disciplines and integration of thought can be measured, and it ends up, a lot of these things are process measures, as you have, the authors propose the outcome that the participants leave the table transformed as a result. And I actually, and so there's a fair amount written on it, and it might be quite interesting to look at that aspect of the convergence science that NSF is looking at. And I came across a paper just yesterday, surprisingly enough, and it talks about the the criteria of integration and reflexivity.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we've got those good bibliometric stuff, metrics on interdisciplinary, and I think it's broadened since I looked at it a while ago, and also criteria that they look at the unusual thing about inclusion and fair representation of stakeholder interests as another metric. So there's, I think there's a lot to be collected from many different places. This is an area where we as RTD evaluation need to some convergence of pulling from a lot of different areas that are talking about how to measure these kinds of things that would go on in the process. And the reason it's important is because there's so much, there's just huge amounts of pressure for science to be more relevant more quickly. And
Yes.
so I think it's an important new area for us to look at in evaluation. We don't have to reinvent peer review, but there has to be some modification so these kinds of projects shine a little bit higher, brighter. You know, we don't have to reinvent promotion and tenure in universities, but there does need to be some new ways of looking at these contributions to society, rather than just looking at publication.
Yeah, really well said. I think that's, you know, I'd love for us to pick this up and talk more, maybe even to try and have a, I don't know if you and your colleagues at HighBar would want to talk about the work you're doing in a webinar, or perhaps we can put together a panel session. But I think your point is this is becoming, you know, a bigger priority for funding agencies and a bigger part of the portfolio. It's really challenging. And as you said, a lot of the focus is on process and process measures. And I think that's something that definitely we should be thinking about, how we can support that kind of evaluation. So thank you for your comments. It's great. I'm glad you were able to join and contribute. Great.
Thanks. It was a little hard to find. I
Yeah,
persisted.
we're working on trying to improve some of that. So great. So I think, sorry?
You'll get there.
Yeah. So I think on that final note, your point about the process measures. So the final bullet here, I think, very specifically, it's referenced in a notion of how do we understand that these convergent processes and convergence science efforts are heading in the right direction without having to wait decades to see how disciplines integrate and how problems are being solved. It's really to think about those aspects of the process and how stakeholders are involved, and what kind of outputs come out of those processes, and how do the participants in the processes, how do they change, and how are they different following their engagement. So I'm going to stop sharing there. I think, again, I appreciate all of you joining today. I'd be happy to stay on a few minutes if you'd like to talk more about this or other topic areas, or if you have questions or feedback for the RTD TIG. Very happy to appreciate you taking the time, and very happy to have you here. And if you have suggestions for us for future topics, if you want to volunteer, we're just looking to engage with you all and make sure that we're providing good quality programming that's going to keep you coming to join calls. So let me stop there and see. And I can also stop the recording. So so your comments and feedback are off the record.